Hello, I am impressed. I'm guessing you're here because you want to learn and grow as a leader. Well, me too. Did you know that one of the best ways to learn something is to teach it? So yes, I'm doing this so I can learn too. Whatever your age, never stop learning and growing. So, I have a question for you. Take just a few minutes, let's say 3, take out your notepad and write down the answer to this question. What made you decide to read this book? Was it FOMO? All of your friends were doing it? Was it your desire to achieve extraordinary results? Was it to learn? What was it? I really want to know. So take a few minutes, write it down, or put it in the comments if you wish. Okay. So who remembers the part of the book where the author talks about the movie City Slickers? Who has actually seen City Slickers? Well, I have a trivia question for you, so be ready. The movie came out in 1991 when I was 17 years old, so yeah, do the math. If you haven't seen it, it's about 3 hipsters from the city that go visit a dude ranch to get away from their city problems. At its core, it's a warm and funny story about finding one's purpose and discovering what really matters. If you recall, the author describes a scene from the movie where Curly, the old cowboy, and Mitch, the city slicker played by Billy Crystal, are having a conversation on horseback. At some point, Curly turns to Mitch and says, "Do you know what the secret of life is?" And Mitch says, "No, what?" Curly holds up his index finger and says this. Mitch says, "Your finger?" Using some colorful language, Curly goes on to explain that he means that one thing matters in life. Mitch says, "That's great, but what's the one thing?" Curly says, "That's what you gotta find out." So write this down, and I encourage you to think about it and journal about it later. What's your one thing that matters most? Go ahead, write it down, put it in the comments if you feel so inclined. Okay, I promised a trivia question, so here you go. City Slickers was responsible for an Academy Award in 1992. Yes, an Oscar. Which one? Go. Okay, here's your answer. Jack Palance for Curly, Best Actor in a Supporting Role. Okay, back to why we're here. Why should you learn this material, read this book, or watch this video? I'll tell you why. I love this book because it's an outline, a foundation, and a well-written guide on how to achieve extraordinary success. Like the best things in life, it's simple but far from easy. Applying this information will take effort, hard work, and time. So what did I learn? Extraordinary success equals 1. A big plan. What's your one thing? Finding the right sequence to work on your plan, and doing the right thing, the one thing, then the next one thing, over and over again. This book reminds us that extraordinary success is sequential, not simultaneous. So take another few minutes and write this down. What does extraordinary success look like for you? Take a few minutes, write it down, put it in the comments if you'd like. Before we move on, let's remember the 6 lies, starting with number 1. Everything matters equally. Multitasking. A disciplined life. Willpower is always on call. A balanced life. And big is bad. Remember these 6 lies, we'll touch on them throughout this review. Based on my experience as an executive coach and leader, I will tell you that the concepts shared in this book work. I'll tell you why. They are based on fundamental principles from nature. You could call them laws. Stephen Covey talked about this in his famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. As a coach, a leader, and student, I've studied these laws, and you can see them discussed in other fantastic books with The 7 Habits, Atomic Habits, Essentialism and Effortless, The Obstacle is the Way, Mindset, and The Goal. I've broken this book review up into 4 sections. The third section is my favorite, but the last is most important. But we're not there yet, so let's dive right into the first section. I'm calling this first section Go Small and Get Focused. Big success comes from when we do a few things really well. The secret of getting ahead is getting started. And the secret to getting started is breaking your complex, overwhelming tasks into small, manageable tasks and then starting on the first one. A long time ago, I was asked to take over a struggling fulfillment operation as the general manager. The quality was bad, the productivity was awful, safety was scary, and morale was really low. So what did I do first? I went small and I made it my one thing. So what was it? I made housekeeping standards my priority, my one thing, and my first thing. I was maniacal. The expectation? Not a broom or a piece of equipment out of place. In the middle of all the chaos, the leaders thought I was crazy. While focused on housekeeping, setting high standards, and explaining why it was so important, I began to build close relationships with the leaders and associates while really getting to know them. I knew that without a strong foundation of the basics, we would never reach any of my goals for our fulfillment center. I don't remember the exact time, but within a year we went from the worst to the best in all categories, including associate engagement, with essentially all the same leaders and associates. Remember, focus is often a matter of deciding what things you're not going to do. We weren't going to focus on metrics, but rather behaviors and actions. It allowed us to quickly get it right, build habits to keep it right, and move on. I found that first domino and started there. It was small but very important. I went small. In the 7 Habits, Covey talks about habit number 3, putting first things first. By focusing on housekeeping, the team could quickly begin to easily see other parts of our operation that were broken and that needed attention. The problem stood out, and it was easy from there. It cleared the way for our team to identify and work the rest of the problem. So find your first domino, focus, and knock it down. What's your first domino? This leads us to section number 2. How do you find the one thing? Well, by asking great questions. As a coach and leader, I'm fascinated by questions. The better the question, the better the answer. But before we get into that, remember the majority of what you want comes from the minority of what you do. As the author says in the book while explaining the 80-20 principle, extraordinary results are disproportionately created by fewer actions than most realize. He says the 80-20 principle is an absolute principle of success and takes it further by suggesting we find the most important one first, the one thing. Remember, some things matter more than others, a heck of a lot more. It's not just the one thing, it's the right one thing. I was coaching someone the other day, and he said he was an achiever and loved getting things done. He attacked his to-do list daily without fail, but was a bit dismayed as to why he wasn't being considered for promotion. After all, he worked harder than everyone else. When I asked him how he knew his to-do list were the right things, the most important things, he wasn't quite sure how to answer. So, we're back to the question, how do you decide at any given moment what matters most? What's the first domino? Let's take another few minutes for a quick exercise. The most successful people I know have an eye for the essential. Write down someone you know like this. What's an example of this behavior? As I reflect on this book, I see there are many parallels with the amazing book Essentialism by Greg McKeown. In the book, he talks about how you identify the vital few from the trivial many. So how do you decide at any given moment what matters most? Remember, the quality of any answer is determined by the quality of the question. I often use this approach when I lead, and it's 100% how I coach. I love the fact the author quoted Voltaire. I'll summarize. Judge a person by their questions rather than by their answers. However, sometimes the right question is not apparent. The author says we must invent the right questions, and I agree. The author proposes a question as a simple formula for finding exceptional answers leading to extraordinary results. Hopefully, everyone remembers it, and it's the foundation of this book. So, What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? I love this question. I love that it's universal. It can be applied to anything. In fact, I modified it and put it at the top of my success list. I see it every day. What's the one thing I can do today such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? It helps lead us to the first domino. Use the focusing question to find your first domino. This brings us to the third section of this book and my favorite, planning and purpose. You see, I'm a big thinker. My wife might say I'm a big stinker, but let's go with big thinker for now. I love the author's suggestion to think big and specific. He challenges us to get out of our comfort zone, and he talks about going from an entrepreneurial to a purposeful mindset, and that the ceiling of achievement must always be challenged. He lays out a clear strategic process named goal setting for now. And if you recall, he starts with your someday goal. It takes me back to Covey again and habit number 2, begin with the end in mind. The author shows you how to tie your someday goal all the way back to what you should be doing each year, each month, each week, and each day to achieve it. The book offers many details, resources, and insights on how to create a great plan and strategy. I love planning. I love thinking big. I love strategy, but I really love purpose. Purpose makes your plan important. In chapter 13, Live with Purpose, the author talks about how to use purpose to create an extraordinary life. He quotes George Bernard Shaw. Life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. You must discover your why. What makes you tick? What gets you excited? Why you do what you do. I talk about this often with those I coach, so I'll ask you, what's your purpose? If you can't answer this question, reread chapter 13 and spend some time with it alone. So what makes your purpose so important? I'll share my thoughts. 1. Real happiness comes from fulfillment, not from material things or money. And fulfillment comes from loving the process, loving the journey, and loving what you do. And there's an important nuance. Loving the process regardless of whether you win or lose. 2. Connect your purpose to what you do. This allows you to stay motivated and get fulfillment from your work. The parable of the 3 bricklayers explains this well. The story goes something like this. In 1666, London was leveled by a great fire. After the fire, the world's most famous architect, Christopher Wren, was commissioned to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral. One day in 1671, Wren observed 3 bricklayers on a scaffold. One was crouched down, one was half standing, and one was standing tall, working very hard and fast. He approached that first bricklayer and asked the question, "What are you doing?" The bricklayer replied, "I'm a bricklayer. I'm working hard, laying bricks to feed my family." He asked the same question of the second bricklayer, and he responded, "I'm a builder. I'm building a wall." But when he asked the third, the most productive of the 3, "What are you doing?" that man replied with a gleam in his eye, "I'm a cathedral builder. I'm building a great cathedral to the Almighty." Love your craft first, then it's okay to like the praise and reward. These words are important. Love your craft, like the reward. To summarize, learn from your failures and tie your planning and purpose together. The author hid some real secret sauce in chapter 13. Now, on to the final and most important section of my review, building the right habits. I love the way the author downplays the importance of discipline, and instead he highlights the importance of habits. He gives us insight to a nuance many misunderstand. You only need enough discipline to build a habit or replace an old one. Remember, a disciplined life is one of the 6 lies. I'm personally not very disciplined. My life changed when I learned the power of habits. As the author describes, what often appears as discipline to others is simply one habit built on top of another, the right habits. That's certainly true in my case. The key again is proper sequence. Sound familiar? Build one habit at a time, beginning with the most important. So, how do you find the most important? You guessed it, the focusing question. I modified it here for you. What's the one habit that by learning it and keeping it will make everything easier or unnecessary? I mentioned it earlier, but I recommend Atomic Habits as another helpful resource. It contains some great underlying science and other helpful tools on habit building. Building good habits will enable you to implement the parts of the book you found valuable. So where will you start? Well, that's up to you. Give it some serious thought. Before I summarize, I want to hear what you found most valuable from this book. Take a few minutes, write those down, and put them in the comments. In summary, The One Thing provides an outstanding framework to help you achieve extraordinary success. I've covered several important parts of this amazing framework, but there's just a few key points I really want you to remember. First, big success comes from doing a few things well. Secondly, success is built sequentially. It's one thing at a time. So ask great questions and find it. And finally, you own it. Hold yourself accountable. The author says taking complete ownership of your outcomes by holding no one but yourself responsible for them is the most powerful thing you can do to drive your success. Think about that. The most powerful thing you can do to drive your success. The author also suggests an accountability partner. An accountability partner can be a mentor, a peer, or in its highest form, a coach. He also claims the single most important difference between amateurs and elite performers is that elite performers seek out teachers and coaches. This simple truth is why I became a coach and have a coach. So, hold yourself accountable and ask yourself, what's the one thing I can do right now to start using the one thing in my life such that by doing it, everything else will become easier or unnecessary? Make the answer your one thing. Take care.